You're listening to Health is Membership, a podcast brought to you by MKM Architecture and Design that's looking to better understand the connection between placemaking and well-being. My name is Zach Benedict. I'm an architect working in Northeast Indiana, and I'm sitting down with innovators across the care continuum to examine how we can redefine a culture of health throughout the Midwest. Ann Sussman is a registered architect, researcher, and college instructor. I felt like I've known Ann for years because in 2016, I fell in love with a book she wrote with her colleague Justin Hollander entitled Cognitive Architecture, Designing for How We Respond to the Built Environment. It won the Place Research Award from the Environmental Design Research Association and forever changed how I approach placemaking. Ann is passionate about how design impacts the human condition, and she's working hard to understand how the disciplines of psychology and neuroscience can reframe how we measure effective design. Ann, thank you so much for joining us. Really excited. I know I've told you this before, but I really fell in love with your work because probably 2 years ago now, I read your book, Cognitive Architecture. And it really challenged me to rethink what we as a firm and maybe as an architecture profession we're doing. And I was really excited to talk to you about really understanding the connection between us as designers and our understanding or ignorance of the unconscious brain. So kind of how did you get interested in the topic in the book in and of itself?
Oh, that's a big question. I think I lived in Europe in my 20s, and I couldn't understand why it was so easy for me as an American in old European cities to just navigate and move around. And I didn't really learn to drive well till I was 28, and I didn't need to drive. And I thought, what is it about buildings? So I didn't actually go to architecture school, first at the Boston Architecture College and then at UCLA, until I was in my early 30s. And that was my driving question. Why could some buildings just speak to me and make me feel at home and others not? And interestingly enough, in architecture school, they never talked about that.
Right.
So,
why do you think they don't?
That's another question. I think architecture got very modern and wanted to be kind of engineering-like and wanted to speak because we were in a modern time without realizing that humans aren't modern. Our brain and body hasn't changed for 40,000 years. And so the reason architecture from the past fits us, whether it's in Siena or old Paris, is because it's designed for a very old brain. We still have the same brain of someone in the 16th century or the 15th century. We don't have a modern brain. Our brains continue to evolve, but not as fast as our technology. That's the problem. They're much, much slower.
Is it something you think the architecture profession has realized, or is still completely in the dark?
I think they're starting to realize it. That's a good question. I think they're starting to realize it, but they're not as smart as the car companies or the consumer products companies. They really study biometrics. They really study how human perception happens.
So in a design sense, what do the car folks get right that architects don't?
Oh, the car folks really know that humans are relational and we are always looking for faces. So they spend a lot of money and time designing a face, the face that you're going to see from their car.
Like the grille of the car?
The grille at the front, as well as the grille in the back. The new BMW electric cars have, they have faces in both the front and the back. And the face in the back of one of their new electric cars is so cute. I had to inquire about it, So they understand how we're emotional, and they understand how we like feeling held. So they use the science of haptics, which is the science of touch, to really understand how different quality materials that you will feel on your steering wheel, on your seat, are going to make you feel, more comfortable in your car.
But why in your research do we recognize that facial recognition is so important? Like in an automobile and something like.
Oh, well, they definitely know that. You can Google that. Cars got angry in like 2007. And they study that. You can Google angry cars and lots of things will come up. People are getting more scared as traffic's gotten worse, they want to get in a vehicle that will keep them feeling protected. A neuroscientist once said to me, cars are envelopes. People get into a car to get away from being in the environment. So they're buying themselves an envelope to get into, to feel safe, kind of zooming about.
But does that thought process translate then equally to architecture?
Well, I suppose, but if you want to design for pedestrians, you're designing differently. For modern architecture is really designed for people in cars, where you're going by so fast. You can't
but in terms of the face of the car is similar to the facade of a building.
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, bilaterally symmetrical eyes, and then the grill is where the nose and mouth is. Yeah.
And our relationship to those facades makes us feel more or less safe with inside its.
Oh, definitely.
walls.
Makes us feel mirrored, makes us feel grounded. It's really interesting when we've done eye tracking studies, and when people are faced with a building that's blank, their brain doesn't want them to look at it. It's amazing to watch. And then if you Photoshop on windows on the building, even if they're not well designed, your brain immediately will look at the window. You're looking for eye-like things, you're looking at it for areas of contrast all the time to keep you alive. It's really, really interesting. So too often the buildings we build are just too blank, so people can't orient.
And you had shared with me some software that kind of helps you map out where your eye goes when you're looking at certain things.
Yeah, that's what eye tracking does, right? It shows where your eye's going, and the car companies use it, advertising companies use it all the time because they want to be able to really predict what you're going to do, and they can predict what you're going to do by where your eyes are going to move, how your eyes move. Yeah, because your brain is encased in concrete, it's encased in a skull. It doesn't see, hear, taste anything. It's the sensory systems that bring stuff into your brain, and they can be a little bit slow actually. So your conscious thinking is slower than your unconscious thinking. That's always kind of assessing the environment around you. Is that making any sense?
Yes, no, completely. So what I'm interested in specifically is trying to better understand how the built environment allows us a sense of security, safety, belonging, those kind of things that I think when designers specifically are being thoughtless, we can take those emotions away, make people feel unsafe and unsecure and lost.
That's exactly right. Yeah, designers really need to understand that people are always looking, their brain, without you realizing, is always looking to keep you safe. So like a secure edge condition, like the old streets in like Siena or Paris, you have these secure edge conditions, but then you also have ways out in the distance. So you kind of immediately find escape route. Humans are stigmatactic. We're a wall-hugging species. So when we see a secure edge consistently, we feel just calmer around it. You really see that in Boston. There's this old street, Hanover Street, that was originally laid out by the Native Americans centuries ago. And it's a street that was slated to be urban renewal, but never got there, and is still so popular to walk down. Because they're even thinking of making it a carless street now. People love walking down it, really secure edge conditions, not too high buildings, not really much more than 3 or 4 stories, and traditional architecture. People love walking down it. And then it leads to the ocean. So it's got a great view at the end.
And it really has to do with that kind of unconscious evolved preference to be a wall hugger.
Yeah, well, you are a wall hugger.
Right, yeah.
Wall hugger. You see this in animals too. Rats, when if landlords want to catch their rats, they won't put the trap in the middle of the floor. They'll put it always on the edge. That's where the animal's more likely to walk. And that edge condition is driving the cells in your body that are helping you navigate. So that's what's amazing. We don't realize all the work our brain's doing. And with biometrics, you can start to see it. And traditional and classical architecture really meets your brain where it is on an evolutionary perspective, and modern does not. Doesn't mean modern's always bad, but it's always going to cause stress in a way that traditional does not.
Where do you think that disconnect happened? That divergence?
Well, you know what happened. I mean, we talked about that before. That was the impact of World War I. because World War I was horrific, and the people we now know, the people who survived it, many of them, 20% or even more, had PTSD. And PTSD shrinks the brain and changes the way you process stimuli. One of the things they now know about vets, too, is they lose the ability to actually see detail. They get blurry vision. So often you cannot even process, like normally a house would have shutters around it. But if you're a vet, just seeing the detail of the shutters would be too much for your brain to take in. So when you look at the founding fathers of modern architecture, Gropius, Mies, Neutra, the first two were German World War I vets, and they created very blank buildings. And they've been retrospectively diagnosed with PTSD. So basically what we've done is we've allowed them to put the paradigm for modern architecture, and now we're creating PTSD environments. Because ironically, what happens, the environment someone with PTSD feels in, which are very kind of defensive, it's all about not looking at the building, but being safe inside the building, looking out. PTSD turned architecture inside out. The environments they feel safe in, a normal neurotypical person will feel unsafe in. So I wouldn't even think, my brain won't even let me think of walking down the new streets in Boston that are lined with glassy blank skyscrapers. My brain won't even let me think of even doing that. It's not empathetic enough. It's not a secure enough feeling. I could maybe drive down there, but because then I'm protected by my car envelope. So the PTSD thing is really huge. It's not that they were bad people. It's that what architects don't understand, and even the architects designing hospitals don't understand, is that you don't see reality. Reality is a construct between your eye and your brain. And if you've had a brain trauma, your brain is going to process reality differently. So someone with a brain trauma can't process Beaux-Arts architecture. It's too complicated. They can't process it. They don't want to go to Venice. There's too much going on with all those buzzy buildings.
And what struck me when you first kind of shared that idea with me was that's the same methodology that really, I think, overtook the clinical care typology of a building. So not only was it largely impact the design profession as a whole, it almost monopolized how we think about the design of something like a hospital.
I know, and it makes them traumatic places.
Whose sole purpose is to heal people.
You heal people, and you made the most traumatic designs possible. And mazes. So basic psychology that the doctors don't understand. Orientation is key for humans. Feeling safe is key for humans. Knowing they can go in and find their way easily is key for humans. And then they design the buildings where none of that's possible. But, respecting them, you have to understand the architects they're hiring don't know anything about human perception.
Right. Well, and
the PTSD explanation, PTSD wasn't even acknowledged by doctors till 1980. Right. And then the ability to see inside the brain and to really see the difference between a PTSD brain, how it shrunk in volume, that didn't happen till like the 1990s or later. Functional magnetic resonance imaging allows you to see inside the brain and actually watch how stimuli is decoded inside the brain, how vision happens. And you can really see. And so a lot of this is really new, and because of the silos in academia, hasn't broken down. The psychologists aren't talking enough to the architects, The doctors aren't hiring the architects without explaining to them what PTSD does to the brain. And then the architects build things that make people feel traumatized.
Right. And it's
even
never
if
been
you're
a
not
tenet
sick,
of
you'll
the
feel
education.
sick. What did you say?
It's never been a tenet of the curriculum, to understand the design's imposition on health or well-being.
No, and it's so great. But a lot of this you have to also have compassion. The fact is, stress, even doctors studying stress, didn't really happen until the 1990s.
Right.
The idea that stress could impact obesity, the idea that stress could impact how kids learn, they didn't talk about that.
Right.
They might even have shrugged it off. Oh, you're not man enough or something,
Right. Yeah, that was the answer for everything. But I guess, so then if you take just a simple example like the wall hugging instinct, that becomes a difficult problem to solve when you don't have a context to begin with. Now, how do you provide an edge condition in a cornfield? And my struggle with this is it's more of a systemic problem than just a singular design or a building can solve. And it needs to be something that I think has a much more broad and multidisciplinary approach to how we prioritize these things, or at least have these discussions where we can openly talk about the impact the built environment is having on the population it claims to serve.
Right.
But I don't know where that discussion most appropriately fits.
Well, I think the human health where it fits, and also curiosity is where it fits. Like being curious about what human needs really are.
Yeah.
So like there's one Harvard evolutionary biologist, I think his name's Dan Lieberman, who says the male body evolved to walk 12 miles a day. The female body evolved to walk 9 miles a day. When you don't get that, you're going to get more stress, more anxiety, more obesity. So knowing that we need to be designing for walking where we're not scared, or designing in a way so we can get that kind of motion, I mean, that's
Right.
is really important. Also knowing that we need to design that people, I think this is really funny in the pandemic, people really need to see people, and people need to see things that remind them of people. So like buildings with face-like facades are easier for us to take in no matter what language you speak. It can be Greek, Italian, it doesn't matter even what century. I mean, the Venice I'm looking at is maybe 400 or 500 years old.
Right.
And the buildings, but they all kind of fit and cohere. And I can make, my mind can make a narrative there to make it make sense, even though I don't speak Italian.
Right.
Whereas the modern things we build, that doesn't happen. You don't want to walk 5 miles through a modern streetscape, ever.
Right.
And that's toxic for our health if what we need to be doing is walking.
And it's something that it seems to me wouldn't or can't be solved with a singular building. It's much more broader discussion. Even though I don't hear a lot of it in architectural circles, I don't hear a lot of it in political or public health circles either, at least at the local level.
That's a really good point, Zachary, because people in architecture school, you always focus on one building, but that's not how people are ever going to perceive it.
Right. And that's our problem, is we think one building matters. So we design these buildings as sculptural, iconic things, which gets us to the very problem we started talking about, is our brain tends not to acknowledge that as a qualitative good thing, to have these sculptural things sitting in an open field with no context edge.
Right, and so that gets us right back into our car.
Right.
And your car is your living room. Your car is now your bedroom with TV.
Yeah.
and that's not good because we're meant for walking.
Right. Well, but you've reverted in some ways. We see this a lot in our senior living work. You've reverted back to a realm that you can control and does have an edge condition. So your living room or your car, now you can monopolize as space that you can control and are comfortable in its ability to enclose you and make you feel, for lack of any other feelings, safe.
Right.
But then we judge people for reverting back to, living in their home or their car without being out and about walking. But those are the environments we've imposed upon them.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah, you're exactly right, Zachary.
How do you think this discussion has or will evolve in terms of academia, in terms of the curriculum for designers?
I don't know. I think it's really hard. I think it's difficult, but I think there's hope under really understanding that human health matters and understanding the human biology is complex, but we still should look at it. Stress is really important, and we're designing stressful places, and we're making our hospitals stressful places. So it's like, wait a minute, guys, what are we doing?
Yeah.
So how do we acknowledge that and acknowledge what humans really need to see? Just basic things like architects learning that repetitive parallel lines stress the brain. The science of that is already known. Parallel lines don't occur in nature. And so we can process them, but it takes more blood flow to our visual cortex, and that's what causes the headaches. And so, designing these hospitals full of repetitive parallel lines, what are you guys doing? It makes no sense. You've got to walk the talk, and understand that nature's kind of preset what we need to see. That's kind of the fascinating thing.
In our office, we always joke that we should know as much about a neighborhood as people as biologists know about a school of fish.
Really? That's true.
Not as a singular person, even as much as a network, a group of people, social animals that are trying the best they can to survive and succeed. And it seems that the more and more we have those discussions, the less and less it was obvious to me when we started that we didn't know anything. And that really triggered my interest in your book and your work, and kind of this theme that if we're serious about health and well-being and quality of life and all these buzzwords now that you hear thrown around fairly loosely, there is hard science to guide us in trying to understand what really would be effective, but very few applications in which you see that practiced in real life.
I think so. And it's also hard to design for people if each person has a car.
Yeah. Right.
Because you see it, I see this in architecture charrettes all the time, where they design for the car parking first, and then that determines the building footprint. Right.
Yeah. And we size parking lots for Black Friday and, large events.
Right.
So then, yeah.
So it's all connected, you see. So you need to really try to get people away from cars or out of cars a little bit.
Which is hard when they're one of the few professions that actually understand this.
What?
The car folks. I mean, one of the things they're doing really
they
well.
understand people so well. They have to, because they're scary. They use everything to understand what people need to see. And they understand that we make decisions irrationally in a way.
Yes.
So they understand. And in America, cars are getting really bigger as people feel less and less. I feel more and more impotent. The cars are getting bigger, really big compared to the cars in Europe.
Yeah.
So they can be cozy in their car and feel powerful. And that's kind of, it's hard to design, I think, sustainable, healthful architecture around cars, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Carcentrism, and you see it all over this country. It's really pretty intense.
What right now is on your mind? What are you working on now?
Well, we did found a nonprofit called the Human Architecture and Planning Institute. We're trying to get some of this science into the curriculum in schools, as well as, into architects' minds, to understand that, it's not just style. You're actually dealing with, human processes of perception. So they kind of understand this. We're writing a new book's coming out called Urban Experience and Design, Contemporary Perspectives on Improving the Public Realm. That will be out October 27th in hardcover and paperback. Okay. And that has like 15 other writers and me, as well as Justin Hollander at Tufts, talking about how to really design for people the way they are. And it includes a chapter on how to have compassion for people with PTSD, and how you can see modern architecture as a direct reflection of the PTSD of the World War I survivors who came up with it. It includes that chapter. But it also includes about the fact that the real important big idea is you have to design for the unconscious brain. That's what the car companies all do. That's what Apple is all doing. They know implicitly how your brain takes in information. There's really incredible stats. Like one stat is 11 million bits, that's a unit of information, is going into your brain every second, 11 million. 10 million of them are visual. 1 million is touch. So visual really matters. So, you can really understand an Apple store, the way they design it, you immediately can touch the Apple computer right there.
Yeah.
And it's always very organized, and all you really see in the Apple store are people, and then very nice, beautiful wooden tables, and then small products on the table. It's all very elegant and clean, right?
Yeah.
Really an amazing experience. It becomes a relational experience. They really get how people interact and need to interact with each other, and they substitute their product for actually a human interaction. One could argue that. So that kind of understanding of what humans need needs to move into the architectural profession, where right now there's basic ignorance. They don't even know it's there.
Do you see a time in the near or distant future where some of these things will be part of a new ADA?
That could be really interesting. It could be ADA, but also just designing for everybody. So imagine, could you do a stress test for a building elevation?
Right.
How stressful will it be to enter this hospital emergency room door?
I mean, it's always fascinating to me that
where a woman couldn't find a door, and so she died of an asthma attack.
Right.
Right. So, so how you could actually figure out, the science is all there, how actually accessible visually your doors are.
Right. Right.
And if you're designing a building someone would want to walk by, you can do all that.
It always struck me interesting that, ADA is largely designed to accommodate wheelchair-bound people with upper body strength. It's maybe 1% of the population. And it has very little to talk about how the built environment can make it accessible to people that have cognitive impairments or mental health issues, that we do know enough now that I think that discussion is something that could be had today. But that to me is where I would hope the architecture profession can lead in that discussion in some way, is that it's more than just trying to accommodate wheelchair-bound people.
Right. It's so interesting because even the pattern on a sidewalk, for instance.
Right.
If you go to Copenhagen, and they have beautiful patterns on miles of streets where there really aren't cars, and the sidewalk's beautiful to walk down it. And it's because it's not just asphalt. They understand, and it's not just concrete slabs. They understand that when you design a walkable space for a person, the visual field delights in taking in stimuli.
Right, right.
And so I see so rarely in the United States this using beautiful patterning brick or concrete. And if you could do that, that can make a place.
Yeah.
Forget the building around it. If you just even have a beautiful pattern for us to walk, it's recognizing our need to walk.
Yeah. And
so the real issue in architecture, the reason they get it wrong is they don't understand the client's basic need to walk, to see visual stimuli when they walk.
Well, and in some ways, and I think this is fair, there seems to be a large instinct to resist being contextual, resist being a background building. Everybody wants to be iconic. Everything wants to stand out. And what's the saying? If everything's special, nothing is. It just gets lost in the noise.
It gets lost, and it makes a disruptive environment that has no coherence.
No, it's just total chaos at that point.
It's just total chaos, and you're going to sit in your car because that makes sense.
Right.
Or
and it looks less chaotic at 45 miles per hour.
Right,
I mean, it doesn't look as troublesome.
Yeah, you've made some really good points.
So where do you think this discussion goes from here?
Well, I think it's a kind of exciting time because we're learning that, nature's real. Yeah. The virus is showing us the things we can't see can hugely impact our lives. And this is also true about our unconscious processing. And you design a blank building, you design a hospital where all you see is repetitive parallel lines, you will implicitly stress people, even people working there.
Do you think the pandemic will escalate or speed up some of these discussions?
I think people are I think people are a little confused right now, but I think what I'm seeing is human health is a hot topic.
Yeah. Well, specifically the built environment's ability to either be safe or an unsafe place for you in terms of infection control. I'm hearing a lot more discussions about how the built environment can protect and insulate you or put you at risk from,
Right.
in this case, catching the virus. But I think people are starting to understand that just washing your hands might not be enough, moving forward. We got to start rethinking some of these things.
Right. And understanding our basic needs better.
Yeah.
So that's part of the issue, that in modern architecture, we don't articulate what the really needs are. There are external needs that get projected by a building that get met or not met. And you need to look at that.
Right.
When you design a building that's hard for people to look at, that hurts the public realm.
Well, my hope is that one of the things people remember out of this is, despite all the technological advances in the world, people still have an incessant feeling of loneliness right now, being quarantined at their home.
Right.
And to remember that feeling, that social media didn't save you from that. It didn't insulate you from that feeling of loneliness. You need to be around people. And that my hope is that feeling and that priority for that physical connection to people in a more broad community is something that an entire generation now doesn't take for granted.
Right. No, that's really well said.
So, well, thank you so much, Ann. This has been fantastic. I absolutely love the work you're doing, and I cannot wait to read the new book.
Thank you, Zachary, and let's stay in touch.
Sure. Let me know.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye. This has been an episode of Health is Membership by MKM Architecture and Design.